Rain sliced through the amber streetlight as Olivia Sterling crumpled against cold pavement, her silk blouse darkening with blood and tears. "Please, don't hit me! I'm already hurt!" Her voice fractured the autumn air, a desperate whisper beneath towering steel and glass monuments to corporate power. Smartphones glowed like predatory eyes as the crowd formed a perfect circle of indifference around her broken form. Brandon Hayes flexed his knuckles, savoring her humiliation when footsteps approached with quiet authority. A man emerged from the shadows, calloused hands that spoke of honest work, storm-grey eyes that had seen too much, the steady presence of someone who mends what others break. As emergency sirens painted the night in red and blue, Olivia found herself staring into the face of her unlikely guardian, completely unaware that this weathered single father harbored truths that would unravel her understanding of heroism, healing, and the profound cost of saving lives. The collision of their worlds was about to begin. Vincent Carter stepped between them with the calm precision of someone accustomed to emergencies. His voice cut through the chaos like a surgeon's blade. "I said back off." Brandon's sneer faltered as he met Vincent's unwavering gaze, the kind of steadiness that comes from years of making life-and-death decisions under pressure. The crowd's murmurs faded to nervous silence, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain on concrete and the distant wail of approaching ambulances. Vincent's trained eyes swept over Olivia's injuries with practiced efficiency, cataloguing wounds with the automatic assessment of someone who had once held scalpels instead of wrenches. She watched him work, her CEO instincts cataloguing the contradictions, hands that moved with surgical precision yet bore the calluses of manual labor, eyes that held both infinite compassion and carefully guarded secrets. Brandon spat on the pavement, his bravado crumbling under Vincent's quiet authority. "This isn't over," he snarled, backing away as police lights began strobing through the rain-soaked night. Vincent didn't respond, his attention focused entirely on the broken woman at his feet. He knelt beside Olivia, his movements gentle despite the urgency, fingers checking her pulse with the practiced touch of someone who understood the fragile mechanics of human life. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed by the lack of continued drama, their phones capturing the final moments before melting back into the anonymous urban landscape. Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the sensation of being truly seen, not as a commodity or target, but as a human being worthy of protection. "Can you stand?" Vincent's voice carried the measured calm of someone accustomed to trauma. Olivia nodded weakly, accepting his offered hand, surprised by the gentle strength that pulled her to her feet. Rain continued its relentless assault, washing the blood from her face, but not the pain from her eyes. Vincent shrugged off his worn leather jacket, draping it around her shoulders with the unconscious chivalry of a man raised to protect rather than exploit. The jacket smelled of honest work and something else, the faint antiseptic scent that clung to those who had once worked in sterile environments. Together they moved toward his pickup truck, an island of warmth in the hostile urban night, while thunder rolled overhead like nature's own commentary on the violence that had just unfolded. The emergency room would have been the logical destination, but something in Olivia's expression, a vulnerability mixed with stubborn pride, made Vincent reconsider. His small apartment wasn't much, but it was safe, warm, and free from the media vultures who would inevitably descend once word of Sterling Enterprises' CEO being assaulted reached the 24-hour news cycle. As they drove through rain-slicked streets, Olivia found herself studying her unlikely rescuer, the way his hands moved competently across the steering wheel, the careful attention he paid to her comfort despite being a complete stranger, the quiet strength that radiated from him like warmth from a well-tended fire. She had built an empire by reading people, by understanding their motivations and weaknesses, yet Vincent Carter remained an enigma wrapped in flannel and kindness. The city blurred past the windows, a kaleidoscope of neon and shadow that seemed suddenly foreign after her brush with raw violence. Vincent's apartment occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house, the kind of place that spoke of modest dreams and careful budgeting rather than corporate excess. As they climbed the narrow stairs, Olivia caught glimpses of a life lived deliberately, children's artwork taped to walls, the lingering scent of home-cooked meals, the comfortable clutter that comes from actually living rather than merely existing. Vincent unlocked the door with practiced quiet, mindful of his sleeping daughter, and ushered Olivia into a world that felt alien in its simple authenticity. The living room was small but welcoming, filled with mismatched furniture that had been chosen for comfort rather than style, books stacked on every available surface, and photographs that captured moments of genuine joy rather than corporate milestones. This wasn't poverty. It was contentment. Something Olivia realized she had never truly experienced despite her vast wealth. A small voice called out from the hallway. "Daddy, is everything okay?" 7-year-old Ruby Carter appeared in the doorway, her dark hair tousled from sleep, brown eyes wide with concern that seemed too mature for her age. Vincent knelt to her level, his voice gentle as he explained that they had a guest who needed help, the kind of simple honesty that children both deserve and understand. Ruby studied Olivia with the fearless curiosity of youth, taking in the torn clothes and haunted expression without judgment, only compassion. "Did someone hurt you?" she asked, with the directness that adults spend years learning to avoid. When Olivia nodded, unable to trust her voice, Ruby reached out and took her hand with the unconscious generosity of a child who had been raised to comfort rather than compete. "Daddy always says hugs make everything better. Would you like one?" The offer, made with such innocent sincerity, cracked something deep inside Olivia's carefully constructed emotional armor. Vincent guided them to the kitchen, his movements efficient as he began assembling a makeshift first aid station from supplies that spoke of a household accustomed to minor emergencies. Ruby climbed onto a chair beside Olivia, chattering softly about school and friends, and the goldfish named Captain Bubbles who lived in her bedroom. Her presence a warm constant that gradually drew Olivia out of her shell-shocked silence. As Vincent cleaned and bandaged her cuts with the precise care of someone who understood anatomy, Olivia found herself watching his hands again, noting the way he moved with surgical confidence despite the humble setting. "You have medical training," she observed, more statement than question. Vincent's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their work, but the slight tension in his shoulders spoke volumes about secrets he wasn't ready to share. Ruby, oblivious to the undercurrents, continued her gentle chatter, describing how her daddy could fix anything and always made the hurt go away. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against windows with increasing fury, while inside the small apartment a different kind of weather was brewing. Olivia found herself relaxing into the domestic rhythm of this unexpected sanctuary, watching as Vincent moved through the bedtime routine with Ruby with the practiced efficiency of a single parent. There were stories read in voices that brought characters to life, prayers whispered with genuine gratitude rather than rote obligation, and the kind of goodnight kisses that spoke of unconditional love rather than obligatory affection. As Ruby's breathing settled into the deep rhythm of childhood sleep, Vincent returned to find Olivia studying the photographs that lined the mantelpiece, images that told the story of a life built around love rather than ambition. "She's lucky to have you," Olivia said softly, meaning it more than any corporate compliment she had ever given. Vincent's smile was tired but genuine as he settled into the chair across from her, finally allowing himself to truly look at the woman he had rescued from the rain-soaked street. They talked deep into the night, sharing the kind of honest conversation that emerges from trauma and unexpected safety. Olivia spoke of the crushing weight of corporate expectations, the isolation that came with power, and the slow erosion of her humanity under the relentless pressure to perform, compete, and dominate. Vincent listened with the attention of someone trained to hear what wasn't being said, his presence steady and non-judgmental as she unraveled the carefully constructed narrative of her successful life. In return, he offered glimpses of his own struggles, the challenges of single parenthood, the delicate balance between providing and protecting, the constant fear that he wasn't enough for a daughter who deserved the world. Neither spoke of the deeper secrets they carried: Olivia's history with Brandon's escalating abuse, Vincent's mysterious transition from medical professional to working-class single father. But trust, like morning light, began to filter through the darkness that surrounded them both. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm, as Olivia found herself reluctant to return to her sterile penthouse and the corporate battlefield that awaited her there. Vincent insisted she stay until her injuries healed, a practical kindness that masked deeper concerns about her safety and well-being. Ruby embraced her presence with the adaptability of childhood, including Olivia in bedtime stories and morning pancake preparations with natural ease. For the first time in decades, Olivia experienced the simple pleasure of being wanted rather than needed, valued for her presence rather than her productivity. She watched Vincent navigate the complex choreography of single parenthood, packing lunches with loving attention to detail, helping with homework that challenged his own understanding, mediating playground disputes with the wisdom of someone who understood that small conflicts often carried big emotions. This was wealth of a different kind, she realized, the richness that came from being truly known and unconditionally accepted. But the outside world, with its demands and dangers, refused to remain at bay indefinitely. Brandon's calls escalated from threats to promises, his voice carrying the particular menace of someone accustomed to getting his way through intimidation and violence. The corporate board grew increasingly restless about her unexplained absence, their concern thinly veiling ambition and opportunism that Olivia now recognized with crystalline clarity. Media speculation began building around Sterling Enterprises' missing CEO, feeding the kind of frenzy that modern journalism had perfected. All heat and no light, designed to generate clicks rather than understanding. Vincent watched her field these calls with growing concern, recognizing the signs of someone caught between impossible choices, trapped by circumstances that offered no clean escape routes. The sanctuary he had provided was temporary at best, and they both knew that reality would eventually demand its due. The crisis came to a head on a Tuesday morning when Brandon appeared at Vincent's door, his expensive suit and practiced smile failing to mask the predatory intent in his eyes. Ruby was at school, leaving Vincent and Olivia alone to face the confrontation that had been building since that rain-soaked night on the downtown sidewalk. Brandon's voice carried the smooth menace of corporate boardrooms and backroom deals as he demanded Olivia's return, his words carefully chosen to sound reasonable while carrying unmistakable threats. Vincent positioned himself between them, his body language shifting into something harder and more dangerous than the gentle father Olivia had come to know. "She said no," Vincent stated with quiet finality. But Brandon's laughter held no humor, only the confidence of someone who had never met real resistance. The confrontation escalated quickly, years of abuse and control colliding with genuine protection and quiet strength, while Olivia watched two very different kinds of men battle for the right to determine her future. The media storm arrived like a hurricane, overwhelming their small bubble of safety with the relentless force of modern information warfare. Photographers materialized outside Vincent's building, their telephoto lenses capturing every movement with predatory precision. News vans clogged the narrow street, their satellite dishes reaching toward heaven like mechanical prayers for higher ratings. Headlines blazed across screens and newspapers. Sterling CEO's secret romance, corporate queen's working-class prince, and worst of all, from boardroom to bedroom, Sterling's scandal. Olivia watched the narrative being constructed around her life with the detached horror of someone seeing themselves dissected in real time. Ruby came home from school in tears, confused by the attention and frightened by the angry strangers who shouted questions at a 7-year-old girl. Vincent held his daughter close, his face dark with protective fury as he realized the price his family was paying for his kindness. The sanctuary had become a prison, and they all felt the walls closing in. The board meeting was a masterpiece of corporate theater. 12 men and women in expensive suits gathered around a mahogany table to decide the fate of the empire Olivia had built from nothing. They spoke in the careful language of fiduciary responsibility and shareholder value, but their underlying message was clear: conform or be destroyed. Olivia sat at the head of the table, watching faces she had once considered allies reveal their true nature with disappointing predictability. They demanded explanations she couldn't give, apologies for choices that felt more honest than any decision she had made in years. The ultimatum, when it came, was delivered with the cold precision of corporate execution. Return to her previous life, end all contact with Vincent and his daughter, and submit to the kind of media rehabilitation that would restore both her image and their stock prices. Or face removal from the position she had sacrificed everything to achieve, financial ruin through carefully orchestrated lawsuits, and the complete destruction of her professional reputation. The choice, they assured her with practiced insincerity, was entirely hers to make. Olivia stood slowly, her movements deliberate, as she surveyed the faces around the table, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. These were not colleagues or advisors. They were vultures disguised as eagles, parasites who had fed off her brilliance while contributing nothing of substance to the empire she had built. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, broken only by the soft tick of the antique clock that had witnessed decades of similar corporate betrayals. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had found something more valuable than their approval. "I choose love," she said simply, the words falling into the stillness like stones into still water. "I choose authentic human connection over manufactured relationships. I choose a 7-year-old girl's laughter over board meetings that crush souls. I choose a man who fixes broken things instead of breaking functional ones." The ripple effects of her decision spread across their faces like cracks in expensive veneer. "I choose to be human again." The aftermath was swift and brutal, executed with the efficiency that only corporate machinery can achieve. Within hours, Olivia found herself stripped of titles, access, and the financial security that had defined her adult life. The penthouse, the car, the carefully curated existence, all of it evaporated like morning mist under the harsh light of contractual reality. But as she walked away from the gleaming tower that had been both her throne and her prison, carrying nothing but a small bag of personal belongings, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: freedom. The weight of expectations, of endless performance and constant competition lifted from her shoulders like a physical burden being removed. She was no longer Olivia Sterling, CEO and corporate icon. She was simply Olivia, a woman who had chosen love over fear, connection over control, authenticity over appearance. The transformation was both terrifying and exhilarating, like stepping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. Vincent and Ruby were waiting for her at the apartment, their faces reflecting a mixture of concern and hope that made Olivia's heart ache with gratitude. Ruby launched herself into Olivia's arms with the uninhibited joy of childhood, while Vincent's eyes asked questions he was too polite to voice. Over dinner, simple fare prepared with love rather than presentation, Olivia shared her decision and its consequences, watching their expressions shift from worry to understanding to something that looked remarkably like pride. "You chose us," Ruby said with the devastating clarity that children bring to complex situations, and Olivia realized that for the first time in her life, she had chosen correctly. They spent the evening planning their next steps. The foundation Olivia wanted to create for women escaping abusive relationships, the way Vincent's medical knowledge could serve those who needed healing most, the life they could build together based on service rather than accumulation. Outside, the media circus continued its relentless performance, but inside their small circle of warmth, the future began to take shape around hope rather than fear. The Sterling Foundation for Women's Safety grew from kitchen table conversations into a force for genuine change, funded initially by the liquidation of Olivia's remaining assets and sustained by the passion of people who understood that broken systems required more than cosmetic solutions. Vincent's medical expertise proved invaluable as they developed programs that addressed not just the physical trauma of abuse, but the psychological wounds that often took longer to heal. Together, they created safe spaces where women could rebuild their lives with dignity intact, where children could laugh without fear, where hope could take root in soil previously poisoned by violence and control. Ruby, now 8 and wise beyond her years, became the Foundation's unofficial mascot, her presence reminding everyone that healing was not just possible, but essential for the next generation. The work was demanding, often heartbreaking, but it felt real in a way that corporate profits never had, meaningful in a way that stock prices could never measure. Patricia Wells appeared in their lives like an answer to prayers they hadn't known they were saying, arriving at the Foundation's modest offices with a manila folder thick with legal documents and a smile that hinted at justice long delayed. She had been Vincent's colleague in what felt like another lifetime, a fellow surgeon who had watched his career destroyed by false accusations and legal machinations designed to protect institutional reputations rather than uncover truth. The folder contained evidence that had taken years to compile, testimony from colleagues who had finally found the courage to speak, medical records that told a different story than the official narrative, and most damning of all, recorded conversations that revealed the conspiracy that had cost Vincent his medical license and his livelihood. Patricia's investigation had been methodical and thorough, driven by the knowledge that an innocent man had been sacrificed to protect guilty ones, and that somewhere in the world, Dr. Vincent Carter was probably still trying to heal people despite the systematic destruction of his professional life. The reinstatement process was complex and emotionally brutal, requiring Vincent to relive the accusations that had torn his life apart while maintaining the composure necessary to navigate bureaucratic redemption. Olivia sat beside him through every hearing, her presence a steady reminder that his worth was not dependent on institutional validation, that the man who had saved her from the rain-soaked streets was the same one who had once saved lives in operating rooms. Ruby attended some of the proceedings, her small hand in his during particularly difficult moments, a living testament to the father he had become in the ashes of the doctor he had been. The medical board's final decision was unanimous. Dr. Vincent Carter was cleared of all charges, his license restored with the kind of formal apology that felt both necessary and inadequate. But the real victory was not institutional vindication. It was the way Vincent's eyes lit up when he spoke about returning to surgery, about the lives he could still save, the healing he could still provide. Their wedding was a small affair, held in the Foundation's community garden on a spring morning when the world seemed full of possibility and second chances. Ruby served as both flower girl and ring bearer, her dress a confection of tulle and pride that she had chosen herself from a consignment shop that specialized in making dreams affordable. The guest list was intimate. Survivors from the Foundation's programs, former colleagues who had stood by Vincent during his darkest hours, and a handful of friends who understood that true wealth was measured in loyalty rather than bank balances. Olivia wore her grandmother's dress, altered to fit both her body and her transformed understanding of what marriage could be when built on mutual respect rather than social expectation. As they exchanged vows under an arbor of climbing roses, surrounded by people who had learned to bloom again after devastating pruning, the ceremony felt less like a beginning and more like a recognition of something that had already been growing in the fertile ground of shared purpose and authentic love. The Foundation's success attracted national attention, but this time the media coverage focused on systemic change rather than personal scandal, on solutions rather than sensationalism. Olivia found herself testifying before congressional committees, her corporate background lending credibility to arguments about the economic cost of domestic violence and the return on investment that came from comprehensive support services. Vincent returned to medicine gradually, first volunteering at free clinics before accepting a position at a trauma center where his surgical skills could serve those who most needed them, regardless of their ability to pay. Ruby thrived in their blended family, her natural compassion flowering under the influence of parents who had chosen service over self-interest, love over ambition. Evenings were spent around the dinner table, sharing stories of lives touched and changed, of small victories that rippled outward in ways that quarterly reports could never capture. But perhaps the most profound transformation was in Olivia herself. The woman who had once measured worth in market share and stock performance, now finding meaning in moments of simple connection. She treasured Saturday mornings when Ruby would crawl into bed between her and Vincent, her small body warm and trusting as they planned their day around family rather than obligation. She cherished the weight of Vincent's hand in hers as they walked through their neighborhood, no longer the corporate power couple she had once imagined herself becoming, but something far more valuable. Partners in the truest sense, people who had chosen each other repeatedly and would continue choosing each other through whatever challenges life might bring. The penthouse with its commanding view had been replaced by a modest house with a vegetable garden, where Ruby could plant seeds and watch them grow, where healing happened in soil as well as souls. The media had long since moved on to newer scandals, leaving Olivia free to exist without constant scrutiny, to make mistakes and learn from them without public analysis of every decision. She had become Dr. Olivia Carter, though she still went by Sterling in professional contexts, a woman who wore her scars as badges of survival rather than sources of shame. The Foundation had grown beyond their wildest early dreams, serving women and children across the country while maintaining the personal touch that made each survivor feel valued rather than processed. Vincent's reputation in the medical community had been fully restored, his surgical skills enhanced rather than diminished by his years of enforced exile from the profession he loved. They were not wealthy in the traditional sense, but their lives overflowed with the kind of richness that could never be stolen by market crashes or corporate betrayals. Ruby, now 9 and displaying the fierce intelligence that came from being raised by parents who valued questions over compliance, often asked about the time before Olivia came to live with them. Vincent would tell her about the night he found a broken woman in the rain and discovered that sometimes rescuing others means rescuing yourself, about how love could grow in the space between one person's need and another's capacity to care. Olivia would add details about learning to choose family over fear, about discovering that home was not a place, but a decision made new each morning to stay committed to the people who see you clearly and love you anyway. These stories had become family mythology, repeated and embellished until they took on the weight of legend, teaching Ruby that transformation was always possible, that people could change if they wanted to badly enough, that love was both a feeling and a practice that required daily attention and constant choice. On quiet evenings, when Ruby was reading in her room and the house settled into peaceful domesticity, Olivia and Vincent would sit together and marvel at the journey that had brought them here. From that rain-soaked night, when violence had seemed to define their meeting, to this moment of profound contentment, they had traveled farther than geography could measure. The scars remained, both visible and hidden, but they had become part of their story rather than its ending, evidence of survival rather than defeat. Vincent's hands, which had once held scalpels to heal and now held wrenches to fix, also held Olivia's heart with the same careful attention to what was precious and fragile. Olivia's voice, which had once commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors, now whispered lullabies and words of encouragement, spoken with the authority that comes from choosing love over power, service over domination. The Foundation's latest annual report lay open on the coffee table between them, pages filled with statistics that represented real lives touched and changed, real families made whole again, real children who would grow up understanding that they deserved better than what their mothers had initially accepted. But beyond the numbers was something harder to quantify: the ripple effect of choosing differently, of refusing to accept that pain and isolation were inevitable parts of the human experience. Each woman who found the courage to leave became someone else's possibility of escape. Each child who saw healthy love modeled became an adult less likely to accept toxic relationships as normal. Each person who discovered their own worth became a beacon for others still searching for their value. As they prepared for bed on this particular night, moving through the familiar ritual of checking locks and turning off lights, Vincent and Olivia carried with them the profound satisfaction that comes from lives lived intentionally, from decisions made from love rather than fear, from the daily choice to keep building something beautiful from the broken pieces of their former existence. Ruby called out her customary, "Good night, love you," from her bedroom, a sound that never failed to fill them with gratitude for the family they had created, not through biology, but through commitment, not through accident, but through the deliberate choice to keep choosing each other, despite easier alternatives. In the master bedroom, as they settled into the comfortable routine of marriage, Olivia reflected on the woman she had been and the woman she had become. The CEO who had once measured her worth in dollars and market dominance was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true power came from the ability to create safety for others, to transform pain into purpose, to choose vulnerability over invulnerability, because that was where real connection lived. Vincent, adjusting his pillow with the careful movements of someone whose hands knew the value of gentle precision, had evolved from the broken doctor hiding from his past into someone who could hold both his history and his future with equal grace, whose scars had become sources of strength rather than shame. "Do you ever miss it?" Vincent asked softly, referring to the corporate world she had left behind, the power and prestige that had once defined her identity. Olivia considered the question seriously, as she always did when he asked difficult things, because their relationship was built on honesty rather than comfortable assumptions. "I miss the certainty," she admitted, "the clarity of knowing exactly who I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to want. But I don't miss the emptiness that came with having everything I thought I needed, and still feeling hungry for something I couldn't name." She turned to face him in the darkness, her voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "I would rather struggle with you and Ruby than succeed alone. I would rather be uncertain about money than certain about loneliness. I would rather choose this life every day than have any other life chosen for me." Vincent's response was wordless but complete. A kiss that tasted of shared history and promised futures, of second chances and first real loves, of the profound peace that comes from being known completely and accepted unconditionally. In the morning they would wake to coffee and school lunches and foundation business, to the beautiful mundanity of lives lived in service to something larger than themselves. Ruby would practice piano while they read grant applications, her music weaving through their work like a soundtrack to purposeful living. There would be challenges ahead. There always were, but they would face them as they faced everything now. Together, honestly, with the unshakable knowledge that they had already survived the worst and emerged not just intact, but transformed. The house settled around them as they drifted toward sleep, creaking with the satisfied sounds of shelter well used, of love well practiced, of a family that had chosen itself and would keep choosing itself tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. Outside, the city hummed with its endless cycle of ambition and exhaustion, of people chasing dreams that might never satisfy and running from fears that might never release them. But inside this modest home, 3 people had discovered the secret that the world's wealthiest individuals often spent lifetimes seeking. That family was not a matter of genetics or geography, but of daily decisions to stay present, to keep caring, to choose love even when it felt risky or uncertain or difficult. And in the quiet darkness of their shared bedroom, as Vincent's breathing settled into the deep rhythm of peaceful sleep, and Ruby's occasional murmur drifted down the hallway like a blessing, Olivia understood with crystalline clarity that she had finally found what she had been searching for in all those years of corporate climbing and competitive achieving. It wasn't success or recognition or financial security, though those things had their place. It wasn't even happiness, which she had learned was too fragile and fleeting to serve as life's primary goal. What she had found was purpose, the bone-deep satisfaction that comes from knowing that your existence makes the world incrementally better, that your choices create more healing than harm, that your love generates more love in return. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was Ruby's sleepy voice from that first night, offering hugs to a broken stranger because her daddy had taught her that making things better was always possible, always worth attempting, always the right choice, even when it cost more than you thought you could afford to pay. And in that memory, Olivia found the perfect encapsulation of everything they had built together, a family founded not on obligation or convenience, but on the radical notion that love was both a feeling and a practice, both a gift and a choice, both the journey and the destination in a life well lived.